I think what first stimulated me and interested me in Jefferson's founding the University of Virginia was reading a short book by Garry Wills. And I was really struck by the creative ideas that Jefferson advanced. And one that amused me particularly was that he designed the university and he was responsible for much of the architecture. And his main building was the Rotunda. And the Rotunda, of course, is a dome-shaped building. And he wanted to have what today we'd really regard as a planetarium at the top. And he was going to have all the stars and this sort of galaxy painted. And then he wanted to have a professor who could sit on a saddle with a boon, and it had stirrups, and who could literally float through almost the planets and give a lecture and move around in the air inside the dome. Obviously, though, others of his ideas were very much more practical, but they were extremely novel at the time. For example, his idea that you could have an elective curriculum, what a relative of mine called a smorgasbord approach to education, where students could choose their courses rather than be forced to remain within a single discipline, which they still do at some British universities. This was the first university in America to allow an elective system, which of course has become common almost throughout the entire university system. But I suppose even more compelling than just his creative ideas was the fact that Jefferson was proposing a public system of education. He wanted to have free primary schools for both boys and girls at a time when there really weren't public education systems. They'd been decreed, interestingly enough, not in democratic countries, but in the most autocratic countries. Russia was one of the first. The Tsars there decreed there should be a public school system. Austria and Prussia was the only one that ever came close. And that was developed largely after Jefferson had put forward a bill during the American Revolution in 1779 to create a public school system. And when he later created the university, he really wanted it to be free, which is very remarkable. In other words, to have the state pay. And so I found this not only of interest because it represented a very revolutionary idea to have a public education system, but because we always think of Jefferson as anti-government and someone who was a minimalist in government and who didn't believe in government spending. And here, on the contrary, Jefferson was actually arguing for an expansion of government. Now, it has to be admitted that he was making the case for an expansion of local government. He wanted primarily the states to be responsible for all aspects of education. And his specific plan for funding schools would have made essentially what today we'd think of as counties and small areas responsible for building a school. New England had come close. The Puritans had required that the settlers in each area and in each town would create a school, but it was never a universal education system. Nevertheless, Massachusetts came closer than anywhere other than Scotland to really creating conditions where there was about 80% literacy.